My brother kept telling me that I was the worst sibling and made me the villain throughout our whole childhood, but Dad's secret folder proved every single lie. Every family gathering, he'd find a way to bring up how I'd failed him as a sister. Remember when you didn't come to my baseball game in 3rd grade? That's when I knew you didn't care about me. Never mind that I was 6 years old and had the flu. Remember when you told Mom I broke her vase? You were always trying to get me in trouble. Never mind that he did break the vase and I was trying to help him clean it up. Keith had rewritten our entire childhood to make himself the victim, and me the villain, and our parents bought every word. He'd tell people I bullied him growing up even though he was 4 years older and twice my size. He'd say I sabotaged his relationships when really his girlfriends left because he was insufferable. He'd claim I turned our parents against him when actually they were exhausted by his constant complaints about me. Every achievement I had, Keith would diminish by explaining how it hurt him. When I got into nursing school, he said I only chose that career to make him look bad since he dropped out of college. When I got married, he said I planned my wedding to overshadow his birthday, which was 3 months later. When I had my first child, he said I got pregnant to steal attention from his promotion at work. Everything I did was somehow an attack on Keith. The worst part was how he performed this victim act in public. At restaurants, he'd loudly say things like, "I forgive you for being such a terrible sister even though it scarred me for life." People would stare and assume I'd done something horrible. At family reunions, he'd give speeches about overcoming the trauma of having an abusive sibling while looking directly at me. On social media, he'd post quotes about surviving toxic family members, and everyone knew he meant me. Our parents tried to stay neutral, but Keith wore them down. He'd call them crying about how I'd hurt him again by existing in his vicinity. He'd threaten to cut them off if they didn't acknowledge how badly I'd treated him. He convinced them that all his problems stemmed from growing up with such a selfish sister. They started asking me to be more considerate of Keith's feelings, which meant basically disappearing from family events so he could enjoy them. I started keeping my distance, but Keith would seek me out just to tell me I was failing as a sister by not being around. When I showed up, he'd say I was intruding on his family time. When I stayed away, he'd say I was abandoning the family. There was no way to win because Keith needed me to be the villain in his story. Without me to blame, he'd have to face his own failures, and that was never going to happen. Things escalated when our dad got diagnosed with cancer. Keith immediately took control, saying he'd handle everything because I was too incompetent to help. He told the doctors I wasn't involved in Dad's care. He scheduled treatments when he knew I couldn't attend, then told Dad I didn't care enough to show up. He blocked me from the family group chat about Dad's condition, claiming I'd just caused drama. But here's what Keith didn't know. Dad had been keeping his own records. Every time Keith claimed I hadn't visited, Dad wrote down that Keith had told me not to come. Every time Keith said I didn't help with medical bills, Dad noted that Keith had refused my money. Every time Keith portrayed himself as the devoted son doing everything alone, Dad documented what really happened. Dad was too weak to confront Keith during treatment, but he was watching everything. The truth came out at what was supposed to be Dad's remission celebration dinner. Dad had beaten cancer, and the whole family gathered to celebrate. Keith stood up to give a toast about how he'd single-handedly saved Dad's life through his devotion and sacrifice while I'd been absent as always. He actually said the words, "At least Dad knows which child actually loves him now." That's when Dad stood up slowly and said, "Actually, Keith, I have something to share." He pulled out a folder and started reading. August 10th, Keith told Lucy not to come to chemo because she'd upset me, but I wanted her there. August 15th, Keith returned Lucy's check for $5,000 saying we didn't need her guilt money, but we did need it. August 20th, Keith told me Lucy was too busy to visit, but she was sitting in the parking lot because Keith said she wasn't allowed in. Dad kept reading entry after entry. 47 documented instances of Keith blocking me from helping while portraying himself as the hero. The room was completely silent. Mom started crying. Our aunts and uncles looked stunned. Keith tried to interrupt, saying Dad was confused from the medication, but Dad pulled out his phone and played a voicemail. It was Keith's voice, and what he said shocked the whole family. Full story on channel, link below.